Conference diplomacy. Okay, so before we proceed on discussing what conference diplomacy is, let us first discuss what is diplomacy. According to Kaufman, it is a practice of conducting negotiations between representatives of states. It is a conducting communication among states through officially recognized representatives, or what we call the diplomats. According to McClinchy, diplomacy has probably existed for as long as civilization has. It can also be defined as a process between actors who exist within a system and engage in private and public dialogue to pursue their objectives in a peaceful manner. To interact without diplomacy would typically limit a state's foreign policy actions to conflict, usually war, but also via economic sanctions or espionage. In that sense, diplomacy is an essential tool required to operate successfully in today's international system. Conference diplomacy is an international conferences held to discuss joint interests. It is like a formal meeting for discussions or a convention wherein the diplomats gathered and participate. The picture here in this slide is an example of conference diplomacy. Diplomats gathered so they can discuss their state's aim or intent. There are frequently practiced diplomatic tracks, as suggested by USIP's Glossary of Terms on Conflict Management and Peace Building. The track 1 is the official discussion. It is typically involving high-level political and military leaders and focusing on ceasefires, peace talks, treaties, and other agreements. The track 2 is unofficial dialogue and problem-solving activities. It aimed at building relationships and encouraging new thinking that can inform the official process. Track 2 activities typically involves influential academic, religious, and NGO leaders and other civil society who can interact more freely than high-ranking officials. Some analysts use the term track 1.5 to denote a situation in which official and non-official actors work together to resolve conflicts. Third one is people-to-people diplomacy. It is undertaken by individuals and private groups to encourage interaction and understanding between hostile communities and involving awareness raising and empowerment within these communities. Normally focused at the grassroots level, this type of diplomacy often involves organizing meetings and conferences, generating media exposure, and political and legal advocacy for marginalized people and communities.
So, as an addition, conference diplomacy serves the aim of negotiating, drafting, and finally, adopting a treaty. In conference diplomacy, we have what we call international conference. According to Jean Robert, the author of The Dynamics of Diplomacy, international conference is a format of doing diplomacy that has become ever more prominent over time. And when we say prominent, it means it is noticeable or it stands out among the other forms of conference like General Assembly, meetings, or even workshop. And in international conference, we have ad hoc conference. Ad hoc conference is an effective tool to achieve a wide range of purposes, from exploratory consultations to treaty making and dispute settlement. Also, it is proven that it is effective because ad hoc conferences are a time saving, pragmatic method of negotiation. They are usually one time events lasting no more than a couple of days. They are format to reach specific, well defined goals, and the participants, agenda, rules of procedures, and venue can be tailored to achieve maximum effects. And also in international conferences, according to Jean Robert, international conference diplomacy often becomes possible after years of failed conflict management activities like military engagement, local endeavors at truces, resolutions adopted and ignored, fatigue, And when key conflict stakeholders come to the conclusion that a point of no return has been reached, then there may be a long phase of preparatory meetings and ultimately work being done by a preparatory committee to achieve as much agreement as possible before an international conference is convened. But also, conference diplomacy takes many different forms. But what they all have in common is the interaction between three elements. And those three elements name are and those three elements are delegations, a conference secretariat, and a conference president. First, delegations. A delegations constitutes the principal element of conference diplomacy. Delegations represent countries and their interests, while committees discuss and negotiate solutions to specific issues. Delegations are usually composed of the deputy or the head and a number of advisors and experts. They are often mixture of a profe- they are often a mixture of a professional diplomats and the specialists for a certain subject. It is in the committees that specialists draft solutions to specific issues on the agenda. So, in other words, delegations are the representatives of the countries or the government into the conference. The conference secretariat is the second element, and it plays a crucial role in the presentation of the conference. The effectiveness of the conference diplomacy to a significant degree hinges on the professionalism of the conference secretariat. It plays a crucial role in the preparation of conference as well as in servicing the proceedings. The secretariat has many important functions, among them the management of documents, records and papers, by taking them in, copying and distributing them, drafting the agenda, reports or resolutions, rules of procedures. Rules of procedure are also extremely important for an efficient conduct of conference diplomacy. They provide clarity to all the delegates about such issues as timing and locations of meetings, confidentiality of meetings, how to make motions or how to submit proposal and amendments, and even how to vote. Interpretation and translation is organized within the Secretariat, and rules of procedure also define the roles and the power of the conference president, which is our third element. Conference president provides leadership during the proceedings. The president's function are to chair and moderate in sessions. He or she keeps in touch with the delegates and the committee members by attending sessions, informal meetings, or social events. The purpose is to be familiar with the development of the proceedings, understanding where progress is made and where problems are occurring. Experienced and professional presidents exerts considerable authority, and he or she knows when and how to act as a conciliator, to make suggestions, or when not to interfere into a committee's work, and how to exert authority during heated discussions. So, the three elements, the delegation, which is the representative, and the conference secretariat, which is mainly the secretary of the conference, who manages the documents and the papers, and the conference president, which is the chairman or the leader of the conference.
Hello everyone, my name is Lisa Mayoncita and today I'm going to discuss about economic diplomacy. What is economic diplomacy? According to Bain and Woolcock, we can define the new economic diplomacy as a set of activities, both regarding methods and processes for international decision making, related to cross-border economic activities such as export, import, investment, lending, aid, and migration pursued by state and non-state actors in the real world. Economic diplomacy is the process through which countries tackle the outside world to maximize their national gain in all the fields of activity including trade, investments, and other forms of economically beneficial changes. Meron tayong three levels of economic diplomacy. bilateral, regional, and multilateral. Sa bilateral, dalawa lang yung nations na nagne-negotiate. Example nito ay transatlantic trade and investment between United States and European Union. Kung mapapansin nyo, European Union, marami siyang member state, pero pwede siyang mag-negotiate in one entity. Regional trade agreements are treaties among two or more governments that agree to offer more favorable treatment to trade between themselves than they do to goods imported from outside the region. Example neto yung North American Free Trade Agreement and more. Next naman ay multilateral. Multilateral trade agreements are commerce treaties among the three or more nations. Three or more nations siya. Kaya mas mahirap siya makipag-negotiate, hindi katulad ng bilateral. Some of the regional agreement are like multilateral, katulad ng North American Free Trade Agreement. Yung North American Free Trade Agreement siya between US, Mexico, and Canada. Pero si Trump nag-warn siya na aalis na siya dun sa agreement, kaya magiging bilateral na lang siya kasi ang matitira na lang ay Mexico at ang Canada. Next naman ay players in economic diplomacy. State actors, sila yung mga governments natin. Yung Russia, yung China, yung US, and more. Yung NGOs naman, or yung non-state actors naman natin, sila yung mga NGOs natin. Sino ba yung mga NGOs natin? Sila yung World Trade Organization, World Health Organizations, and more. Tapos, next naman is businesses and investors. Familiar tayo sa Adidas, sa Toyota, sa McDonald's, and more. Pag-usapan naman natin is about trade and aid diplomacy. Napag-usapan na natin about sa trade, yung TTIP, NAFTA, and more. Ngayon naman, pag-usapan natin ang about sa aid. Aid can be economic, military, or humanitarian emergency. Ano example ng humanitarian emergency? Aid for disasters, katulad ng nangyayari sa atin ngayon na pandemic. Sobrang laki na ng utang ng Pilipinas sa World Bank at sa ibang bansa dahil sa paglutas ng pandemic na nangyayari sa atin. Ano naman ang carrot and stick approach? Carrot can be economic aid, military aid, technical assistance, or diplomacy. Ito yung may gusto kang kuhanin sa isang country na gagamitan mo siya ng positive way. Economic aid, military aid, technical assistance, diplomacy, and more. Example nito ay Philippines and US partnership. Matagal nang magpartner ang Philippines and US. Anong ginagawa ng US sa atin? Iniidan nila tayo ng military aid. Next naman is stick. Ito naman, kukuha ka ng isang outcome na in a way na parang masama or negative. Like military actions, economic sanctions, etc. Ang example nito ay economic sanctions in Cuba. Pag-usapan natin ang economic sanctions against Cuba. Ito ay the US embargo against Cuba is a series of sanctions imposed on Cuba by United States which have existed since 1960. Issues an executive order broadening the US restriction of trades against Cuba. Economic sanctions against Cuba. The ensuing embargo which effectively restrict all trade between Cuba and US had profoundly negative effects on the island nation's economy. President Kennedy imposed a trade embargo on Cuba because of the Castro regime's ties to the Soviet Union. Kasi 'di ba magkalaban dati ang US sa Soviet Union na ang Soviet Union ay na-dissolve na.
So now let's move on and talk about the importance of diplomacy when it comes to our economics. So mostly of the other countries has suffered in the Great Depressions during and after a war, and that's the start of their economic crisis. So most of us now are witnessing the unprecedented changes when it comes to geopolitics, with a clear impact to a businesses like international and domestic businesses. So by studying history and by reading some history, we all know that it is really hard to get back in normal when you are in the middle of crisis out of nowhere, when you are in the middle of economic crisis. You don't know how to get back to start your business, and it's really hard to get started when you don't know how to flatten a curve without a clear plan, without a clear, precise plan of the government. So, uncertainty. Let's go back to the topic of economic diplomacy. Most of the countries has lack of trust when it comes to their once trusted countries because they got betrayed. They has because they have a unpredictable movement, and they have an interaction with other allies. So you don't know. You really don't know, and that's my opinion. So, mm, by emerging and developing countries, it needs to provide a unique perspective and a clear, precise plan and decision when it comes to policy making and decision making, in order to achieve the economic stability. So, the concern here in diplomacy is the economic policy issues such as work of delegation, um, just like in World Trade Organization or WTO. When we talk about economic diplomacy, hindi mawawala ang economic diplomats. So, economic diplomats, they are the one who's monitor and reports the economic policies in every foreign countries. And they give their nation's advice, they give their nation government advice on how to influence and getting back their target nations to them. So, in economic diplomacy, kasi ang target yan ay ang economic resources. And it's either rewards or sanction ang i-give back niyan sa'yo, or that's depend on how you interact or how you influence and how you entertain them for your in order to achieve your target state, in order to achieve a national interest to that target state. And the state will make you some action, of course. They have to be 100% really prepared and fully equipped when it comes to decision making, just like what I've said earlier. And of course, it requires the application of expertise to analyze the effect to effect of your decision to a target country or the receiving country, kung magbe-benefit ba sila dito, kung makakasama ba sa kanila. You have to negotiate. You have to be kind. So, in other words, a nation that wants to attract a business must be proactive rather than passive, and they must seek out opportunities and learn how to bring them in their own state and learn to adapt, cultivate their cultures, etc. So, this kind of activities in economic diplomacy utilizes to promote the nations and seek businesses opportunities, but not only a traditional businesses or activities, but its effectiveness to emerging nations seeking to conserve personal and financial resources. So, and it helps to strengthen the mutual benefits of cooperation and to have a politically stable relationship in other countries. And it helped to increase the economic stability, economic security. And the key point here is We have to be better. We have to be careful whom or which we trust, rather than uncertainty that can be created by economic diplomacy by persuading us. We must to be careful. We must criticize and check it carefully whom we trust. And we need the development that can be strengthened our globally, locally, and regionally nations. And when we say about diplomacy, it means negotiation. So so ang highlights dito, when we talk about diplomacy, it means negotiation. So dapat parehas kayo ng allies mo magigain, hindi lang ikaw, hindi lang siya. It needs a positive sum. So that's it. Thank you.
Here is the example of countries who increase economic because of diplomacy. But first, let me introduce what is EU. EU is one of the strongest economic areas in the world. With 500 million people, it has 7.3% of the world population but accounts for 23% of nominal global GDP. Japan is also a member of the European Union. According to European Union, Japan is the world's second largest developed economy. Japan's prosperity is based on maintaining and strengthening the free and open international economic system, which also leads to the stability and growth of global economy. With this in mind, Japan has promoted to the EU of fundamental values, which is one of Japan's most important partners in terms of trade and investment. Next, Singapore. Singapore is a member of ASEAN, or Association of Southeast Asian Nations. There is an advantage of being a member of ASEAN. One is reducing trade barriers between member states and improving economic growth. Second, promoting regional peace and stability of its member. Number 3, increase the tourism of the member states. Number 4, improving human quality for ASEAN members. And lastly, cultural exchange and etc. In addition, economic cooperation for the member of ASEAN. Elimination of tariffs help ease the flow of goods and services in the region. The ASEAN Free Trade Area, or AFTA, regulates that removal of tariffs on 80,000 item enterprises have more access to neighboring markets, and consumers benefits from cheaper price of goods, therefore generating higher export and imports. Next, the Great Britain. When the United Kingdom leaves the European Union on 31 of January 2020, after full ratification of the withdrawal agreement, we will enter into the transition period. This time-limited period was agreed as part of the withdrawal agreement and will last at least 31 of December 2020. Until then, it will be business as usual for citizens, consumers, business, investors, students, and researchers in both the EU and the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom will no longer be represented in the EU institutions, agencies, bodies, and offices, but EU law will still apply in the United Kingdom until the end of transition period. The EU and the United Kingdom will use these months to agree on a new and fair partnership for the future, based on the political declaration agreed between the EU and the United Kingdom in October 2019. Last, United States of America. Here's the benefits of the United States of America being a member of European Union. Number 1, free trade and removal of non-tariff barriers have helped reduce cost and price for consumers. Increased trade with the EU creates jobs and higher income. Over 52% of UK exports are to EU. Trade within the EU has increased 30% since 1992. Countries in the EU are amongst the highest position in the Human Development Index or HDI. Removal of custom barriers means 60 million custom clearance documents per year no longer needs to be completed, cutting bureaucracy and reducing costs and delivery times. According to one study, over 10 years, 2003 to 2013, the single market has boosted the EU GDP by 877 billion European dollars. This is represents 5,700 of extra income per household. Poorer countries such as Ireland, Portugal, and Spain have made significant degrees of economic development since they joined the European Union. A report suggests that over the period of the 1980s and 2004 enlargement, there are substantial positive payoffs of EU membership with a gain in per capita GDP of approximately 12% of poorer countries. That's all.
Nuclear diplomacy. Nuclear diplomacy deals with prevention of nuclear war and peacetime proliferation. It also deals with the use of threat of nuclear warfare to achieve diplomatic goals. That is the broad definition, but nuclear diplomacy also has different meanings for different categories. Number 1, NWS. For these countries, nuclear diplomacy primarily means retaining their special status and preventing other countries from acquiring nuclear weapons. Number 2, for these countries, nuclear diplomacy basically means getting access to nuclear equipment and technology for their civilian nuclear programs. One of the most well-known philosophies of nuclear diplomacy is mutually assured destruction, which was followed by US and USSR. If either had used a nuclear warhead against the other, both would have been destroyed due to each other's deterrence capability. One of the recent examples of nuclear diplomacy related to trade is the India and United States Civil Nuclear Agreement. Treaty on No First Use. Many countries sign a pact for not being the first attacked with nuclear weapon during a war. It is called Treaty on No First Use. Countries pledging no first use are China, India, and North Korea, meaning that they are not to be the one first to use nuclear weapons at any time or under any circumstances. Nuclear diplomacy. According to Henry Santamaria, it is called the same idea used by Teddy Roosevelt: speak softly and carry a big stick. Using force to achieve diplomatic solutions works primarily on those countries that regard appeasement diplomacy as a weakness.